In the heart of downtown, where the city lights flickered against rain-slicked streets, stood a small bookstore cafe called Turning Pages. It wasn't much to look at from the outside, just another storefront wedged between high-rise buildings. But for Zoe Williams, it was both sanctuary and survival. Where are you watching from today? Comment down below. Every morning, Zoe would kiss her sleeping 6-year-old daughter goodbye, leaving her with a neighbor before the sun had fully risen. By the time most people were having their first cup of coffee, she had already stocked shelves, counted the register, and prepared for another day of smiling through exhaustion. Just keep going, she would whisper to herself. This mantra had carried her through 5 years of single motherhood, through nights spent sketching by lamplight after her daughter had fallen asleep, through mornings when her artistic dreams seemed further away than the stars. The rain had been relentless that Tuesday evening, the kind of downpour that kept customers away and left Zoe staring out the window, watching people hurry past with umbrellas and hunched shoulders. She'd been doodling on a napkin, a habit her manager overlooked, when the bell above the door chimed softly. A tall figure stepped inside, shoulders damp from the rain, a baseball cap pulled low over his face. There was something familiar about him, but Zoe couldn't quite place it, as he shook droplets from his jacket and moved quietly toward the back shelves. The store was empty besides the two of them, the rain creating a private cocoon of soft drumming against the windows. Zoe returned to her drawing, a series of intricate patterns that had started to form the skyline of a city she'd never visited but often dreamed about. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice the customer approaching until he was standing right in front of her, a stack of art books cradled in his arms. "Those are beautiful," he said, nodding toward her napkin sketch. When Zoe looked up, she felt her heart skip. The man had removed his cap, revealing a face that millions would recognize instantly. Keanu Reeves stood before her, his expression gentle and genuinely interested in her artwork. "Thank you," she managed, straightening up and quickly tucking the napkin under the counter. I'm sorry, I was just passing time. Did you find everything you were looking for?" His smile was warm. "I think so. I've been looking for some new perspectives on urban landscapes. Sometimes the world feels too digital, you know. I miss the texture of paint, the imperfection of a hand-drawn line." As Zoe began scanning the books, expensive hardcover editions on modern art techniques and famous street artists, she found herself relaxing into the conversation. "I know exactly what you mean," she said, surprising herself with her candor. "Everything's so filtered now. But there's something honest about putting pencil to paper, about making mistakes you can't just delete with a click." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "That's it exactly. The vulnerability of creating something that can't be erased. That's where the truth is." He gestured toward where she'd hidden her sketch. "Your work. It has that quality. How long have you been drawing?" Zoe laughed softly, embarrassed, yet flattered. "Since I could hold a crayon. But these days, it's just something I do between everything else. Between shifts, after my daughter falls asleep, waiting for the laundry to dry. Just moments stolen here and there." "The best art comes from lived experience," he said, his voice carrying a quiet conviction. "From the spaces between obligations, from the weight of what we carry." As she finished ringing up his purchases, Zoe glanced at the total, $247.89, and hesitated. It felt surreal to be charging Keanu Reeves for books about art, especially when he'd shown such genuine interest in her own work. In that moment, something impulsive and perhaps foolish came over her. "These are on the house," she said, pushing the bagged books toward him, his eyebrows raised in surprise. "I can't accept that." "Please," Zoe insisted, lowering her voice. "Your movies, they've gotten me through some really tough nights. When my daughter's father left, when I wasn't sure how we'd make rent, I'd put on one of your films, and for a couple hours things didn't seem so impossible." She smiled, embarrassed by her confession. "It's just books, and it's just me saying thank you." Keanu stood there, visibly moved by her words, his hand still halfway to his wallet. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Zoe. Zoe Williams." "Zoe, that's one of the kindest things anyone has said to me in a long time, but I can't let you do this. You could get in trouble." She shook her head. "I'll cover it. The owner's my uncle. He won't mind, not really." This wasn't entirely true. Her uncle was kind, but ran a tight business, but she'd figure it out later. Keanu's eyes remained on her, studying her with a thoughtfulness that made her feel truly seen for the first time in years. "Can I see more of your work? Not the napkin. Your real pieces." Zoe hesitated, then reached for her phone, scrolling to a folder of photographs she'd taken of her best drawings and paintings, pieces created in the dark hours between her daughter's bedtime and her own exhaustion. Art that captured city skylines, portraits of strangers on buses, the sleeping face of her daughter bathed in moonlight. As Keanu swiped through the images, his expression grew increasingly serious. He paused on a particular piece, a large canvas showing a woman standing on a rooftop, her back to the viewer, facing a city that blended reality with dreamlike elements, buildings that curved like waves and streets that spiraled toward the sky. "This is extraordinary," he said finally, looking up at her. "You have a genuine gift, Zoe. These shouldn't be hidden in a folder on your phone." She shrugged, deflecting the compliment. "Maybe someday, when life settles down a bit." "Sometimes life doesn't settle down unless we make it," he replied, handing back her phone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, simple, elegant, with just a name and number. "This is my personal assistant. Would you mind if I shared your work with some people I know, people who might be interested?" Zoe stared at the card, disbelief washing over her. That's very kind, but you don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to," he said, that familiar half-smile appearing. "But art like yours deserves to be seen, just as kindness deserves to be acknowledged." The rain had softened to a gentle patter as Keanu gathered his books. Before leaving, he turned back to her. "May I take a photo of that napkin sketch, as a reminder?" Wordlessly, Zoe handed him the napkin. "Keep it, please." He accepted it carefully, as if it were made of something far more precious than paper. "Thank you, Zoe Williams, for the books, for the art, and most importantly, for reminding me why stories matter." As the door closed behind him, Zoe stood motionless behind the counter, the weight of what had just happened slowly sinking in. Outside, through the rain-streaked window, she watched as one of Hollywood's most beloved actors carefully tucked her napkin, drawing into his jacket, protecting it from the rain as he disappeared into the night. Later, as she calculated how to cover the cost of the books from her already stretched paycheck, Zoe wondered if she'd imagined the entire encounter. But the business card sat on the counter, real and tangible, carrying a possibility she hardly dared to consider. A week passed, and the memory of Keanu Reeves' visit began to feel more like a dream than reality. Zoe had slipped his assistant's card into her wallet, taking it out occasionally to confirm that yes, it had happened, but she never found the courage to make the call. What would she even say? "Hello, your boss met me at a bookstore and liked my napkin doodle?" The very thought made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Life continued its relentless pace. The morning shift at the bookstore, the afternoon hours at her second job cleaning offices, evenings with her daughter Lily, helping with homework, and making dinner from whatever was on sale that week. The card remained in her wallet, a silent reminder of a moment when possibility had brushed against her life before disappearing like the rain. It was Thursday afternoon when the call came. Zoe was on her lunch break, sitting on a bench outside the bookstore, sketching the pigeons that gathered around a discarded sandwich crust. Her phone vibrated against her hip, an unknown number lighting up the screen. "Hello, is this Zoe Williams?" The voice was polished, professional. "Yes, this is she." "My name is Rebecca Winters. I'm calling from the Meridian Gallery. Do you have a moment to speak?" Zoe's pencil froze mid-stroke. The Meridian Gallery was one of the most prestigious contemporary art spaces in the city, the kind of place where established artists fought for wall space and newcomers could only dream of being noticed. Yes, of course." "Wonderful. I'm calling because we're putting together a special exhibition next month featuring emerging artists, and your work has been recommended to us by one of our patrons." Zoe's mind raced. She hadn't submitted her work anywhere. She'd never even shown it publicly outside of a few pieces in a coffee shop years ago. "There must be some mistake," she said carefully. I'm not I mean, I do create art, but I'm not a professional artist. Rebecca's laugh was warm. That's exactly what we're looking for, Ms. Williams. Raw talent that hasn't been shaped by the formal art world yet. An anonymous benefactor has sponsored this exhibition specifically to highlight artists who haven't had traditional opportunities. All expenses would be covered: framing, printing, installation. We'd feature 5 to 7 pieces of your work, and you'd retain all rights and receive 100% of any sales. The world seemed to tilt beneath Zoe's feet. This is very unexpected, she managed. I understand. It's quite unusual, but our benefactor was quite insistent after seeing your work. Specifically, I believe they mentioned a piece showing a woman overlooking a city with curved buildings and spiral streets. The rooftop painting, the one Keanu had lingered on. The exhibition opens in 3 weeks, Rebecca continued. We'd need your pieces by next Friday for preparation. Would that be possible? Zoe's mind spun with practical concerns. Childcare during the opening, time to prepare the pieces, the cost of materials to finish some of her half-completed works. As if reading her thoughts, Rebecca added, the sponsorship includes a stipend for your time and any materials you might need. And of course, professional childcare can be arranged for any events you need to attend. Tears pricked at the corners of Zoe's eyes. May I ask who recommended my work? I'm afraid the patron has requested anonymity. Is that a problem? No, Zoe said quickly. No, not at all. This is overwhelming. Take the day to think about it, Rebecca suggested kindly. Call me back tomorrow with your decision. We truly hope you'll say yes. After the call ended, Zoe sat motionless on the bench, pigeons pecking fearlessly at her feet. She knew who the anonymous benefactor was. The timing, the specific painting mentioned. It could only be Keanu Reeves. But why? Why would a Hollywood star go to such lengths for a bookstore cashier who'd given him a few art books? That evening, after tucking Lily into bed, Zoe sat at her small kitchen table surrounded by her artwork. Pieces she'd created in stolen moments, never believing they'd see gallery walls. The opportunity before her seemed impossible, too good to be true. What if she embarrassed herself? What if her work wasn't good enough? What if this was some elaborate prank? But beneath the doubt lay something stronger, the fierce desire to give her daughter a different life than the one they were living. To show Lily that dreams weren't just things people talked about, but never chased. To prove to herself that the fire that had kept her creating through exhaustion and hardship had been worth tending all these years. With trembling hands, she dialed Rebecca's number. I'll do it, she said, when the gallery director answered. I'd be honored to be part of the exhibition. The next morning, a courier delivered an envelope containing a check that made Zoe's knees buckle, enough to cover materials, time off work, and then some, along with gallery paperwork and exhibition details. There was also a handwritten note. Art is truth, and your truth deserves to be seen. Looking forward to the exhibition. A friend. The handwriting was unmistakably male, the simple words carrying an echo of the conversation in the bookstore. Zoe traced the letters with her fingertip, still unable to fully believe what was happening. That weekend, she took Lily to the art supply store. For the first time in years, Zoe filled her cart without checking price tags, selecting the paints, canvases, and brushes she'd always coveted, but never allowed herself to buy. Lily watched with wide eyes as her mother transformed before her, moving through the aisles with purpose and excitement, rather than the weary determination that usually characterized their shopping trips. Are you going to be famous, Mommy? Lily asked as they left, arms laden with supplies. Zoe laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in years. No, sweet pea, but someone believes I might be good, and sometimes that's enough to change everything. Over the next 2 weeks, Zoe worked with feverish intensity. She arranged time off from both jobs, painted through the night while Lily slept, and finished pieces that had been waiting years for completion. With each brushstroke, each line, each splash of color, she felt something inside her awakening, the artist she might have become if life had taken different turns. When Rebecca came to collect the finished pieces, her eyes widened at the sight of Zoe's work spread across the small apartment. These are remarkable, she said, studying a particularly vivid cityscape. Our benefactor wasn't exaggerating. She turned to Zoe with genuine admiration. Are you ready for people to see these? Zoe looked at her paintings, her dreams, her struggles, her hopes made visible, and felt a certainty that surprised her. Yes, she said simply. I think I've been ready for a long time. The night of the exhibition arrived with an unseasonable warmth that seemed to mirror the fire in Zoe's veins. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman who stared back at her. Gone was the exhausted cashier in a faded uniform. In her place stood an artist in a simple black dress that Rebecca had insisted on sending over. Part of the presentation, she'd explained. Lily sat on the edge of the bathtub, swinging her legs in her best party dress, watching her mother with wide-eyed admiration. You look like a movie star, Mommy. Zoe smiled, though her hands trembled as she fastened a borrowed pair of earrings. Just remember, sweetie, there's going to be a nice lady from the gallery to stay with you in the children's area. They have games and movies and snacks. If you need me, she'll bring you right to me. I know, Mommy. You told me 100 times. Lily rolled her eyes with the dramatic flair only a 6-year-old could muster. But I won't need you. I'm a big girl. The taxi ride to the gallery passed in a blur of streetlights and nervous heartbeats. The Meridian Gallery stood in the heart of the Arts District, its modern facade illuminated against the darkening sky. Even from the street, Zoe could see people moving inside, glasses of champagne catching the light, the buzz of conversation spilling onto the sidewalk. I can't do this, she whispered, frozen in the back seat of the taxi. Yes, you can, Lily said firmly, taking her mother's hand. You're the best artist in the whole wide world. With her daughter's unwavering faith propelling her forward, Zoe paid the driver and stepped out onto the pavement. Rebecca met them at the entrance, elegant in tailored black, her smile genuine as she bent to greet Lily. Everything is ready, she assured Zoe, guiding them inside. The response to the preview has been exceptional. Several critics are here, and at least 3 serious collectors. Zoe nodded, unable to form words, as she caught her first glimpse of the gallery's interior. The space was transformed, elegant in its simplicity, with strategic lighting drawing attention to the artwork adorning the walls. Her artwork, her soul laid bare for strangers to judge. The children's area was a cozy nook off the main gallery, staffed by a friendly woman who immediately engaged Lily in a craft project. With a quick hug and a promise to check in soon, Zoe followed Rebecca into the main space, where the exhibition was already in full swing. All these people are here to see my work, Zoe whispered, taking in the crowded room. Yours and the other 3 artists we're featuring, Rebecca explained. But your section has been drawing the most attention by far. She guided Zoe toward the far wall where 7 of her pieces hung, perfectly framed and lit. I'll be nearby if you need anything. Just enjoy this moment. You've earned it. Left alone, Zoe stood before her displayed work, seeing it through new eyes. Freed from her small apartment and properly presented, her paintings seemed to have taken on a life of their own. The colors were more vibrant, the lines more confident, the emotions more raw and immediate. She drifted among the guests, anonymous at first, listening to their unfiltered reactions to her work. An older woman in pearls stood transfixed before the rooftop cityscape, murmuring to her companion about the extraordinary tension between reality and imagination. A young man with tattoos covering his arms studied her portrait of Lily sleeping, his expression soft with recognition of the love captured in each careful line. The use of shadow here is remarkable, said a distinguished-looking man in wire-rimmed glasses, gesturing to one of her urban landscapes. It's as if the artist understands that the darkness is just as important as the light, that we need both to see truth. Zoe wanted to melt into the floor, overwhelmed by hearing her private visions discussed so seriously, so respectfully. An hour into the evening, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, conversations paused, and then resumed with increased energy. Rebecca appeared at Zoe's elbow, her composure slightly cracked with excitement. He's here, she whispered. Who? Zoe asked, though something in her already knew. Rebecca nodded toward the entrance, where Keanu Reeves had just arrived, accompanied by a small group of people whose casual elegance screamed influence in the art world. He was dressed simply, dark suit, no tie, but there was no disguising his presence or the effect it had on the room. "Did you know he was coming?" Rebecca asked, her professional calm slipping. Zoe shook her head, watching as he spoke quietly with the gallery owner, his gaze already scanning the room. When his eyes found hers, he smiled, that same genuine smile from the bookstore, and began making his way toward her, navigating the now buzzing crowd with graceful determination. "Zoe Williams," he said when he reached her, his voice warm with recognition. "Your work is even more extraordinary in this setting." "You did this," she said softly, not a question, but a statement of understanding. "Why?" "Because talent deserves recognition, because kindness deserves to be repaid." He glanced around at the gathering crowd, then added quietly, "And because I remember what it's like to have a dream that seems just out of reach." Before she could respond, they were surrounded by Keanu's companions, a renowned gallery owner from New York, an influential art critic, a collector known for launching careers with strategic early purchases. Introductions blurred together as Zoe found herself in conversations she'd never imagined having, discussing her techniques, her inspirations, her vision. Throughout the evening, Zoe occasionally caught glimpses of Keanu moving through the gallery, speaking earnestly to various guests while pointing out details in her work. She watched in disbelief as small red "sold" dots appeared beside 5 of her 7 pieces, each representing more money than she typically earned in months. Near the end of the night, as the crowd thinned, Zoe found a moment alone with Keanu in the quiet corner of the gallery where her favorite piece hung, a painting of 2 hands barely touching, one adult and one child, against a background of swirling stars. "I should be thanking you," she said, "but it doesn't seem enough." Keanu shook his head. "No thanks needed. Do you know why I noticed your sketch that night in the bookstore?" "Why?" "Because you were creating beauty in the middle of exhaustion, because you refused to let circumstances steal your voice." His gaze was direct, honest. "Years ago, when I was struggling, a director saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. He gave me a chance that changed everything, not because he wanted thanks, but because he believed talent shouldn't be wasted." "So this is you paying it forward?" Zoe asked. "This is me recognizing a fellow traveler," he corrected gently, "someone who has something genuine to say about what it means to be human." He gestured around them. "Everyone here tonight saw it too. This isn't charity, Zoe. This is recognition." As the evening wound to a close, Zoe collected a sleepy Lily from the children's area, her daughter's face lighting up at the sight of Keanu, recognition dawning. "You're the man from the movies Mommy watches when she's sad," Lily exclaimed with a child's unfiltered honesty. Keanu knelt to Lily's level, his smile warm. "And you must be the girl from the paintings. I can see why your mom finds you so inspiring." In the taxi ride home, with Lily asleep against her shoulder and a folder containing sales information and contact details from serious art world figures in her lap, Zoe finally allowed herself to cry, not tears of sadness or exhaustion, but of possibility, of doors opening after years of standing in hallways. Rebecca had whispered to her just before leaving, "This is just the beginning, if you want it to be." And for the first time in years, Zoe believed that might be true. 6 months after the exhibition, Zoe stood in her new studio space, morning light streaming through windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. The room was alive with works in progress, canvases in various stages of completion, sketches pinned to boards, a corner dedicated to Lily's own budding artistic efforts. A far cry from the kitchen table, where she'd once hunched over her work in the middle of the night. The sales from that first exhibition had been just the beginning. 3 more of her pieces sold in the weeks that followed, and Rebecca had helped negotiate a commission for a local tech company's headquarters. But the most significant change had come in the form of a letter that arrived a month after the show, an offer of a full scholarship to the city's most prestigious art institute, including a stipend for living expenses and a childcare allowance. "They never offer packages like this," Rebecca had said, stunned, when Zoe called to ask if it was legitimate. "Someone must have made a very compelling case for you." Zoe knew who that someone was, though Keanu himself maintained a respectful distance, checking in occasionally through Rebecca or his assistant, but never intruding on the new life that was unfolding. His intervention had opened doors, but Zoe was the one walking through them, proving with each new painting that the faith placed in her talent had been justified. Today was special. Her first solo exhibition was opening in just hours at a gallery even more prestigious than the Meridian. As she applied the final touches to a small canvas that had been troubling her, her phone chimed with a text from her new assistant, confirming the childcare arrangements for Lily during the opening, an assistant of her own. Sometimes the changes in her life still felt like a dream she might wake from at any moment. "Mom, look what I made!" Lily burst into the studio, proudly holding up a watercolor of what appeared to be two figures, one tall, one small, standing before a wall of colorful squares. "That's beautiful, sweet pea," Zoe said, setting down her brush. "Is that us at the gallery?" Lily nodded vigorously. "That's you and me looking at your paintings. And look." She pointed to a figure in the background, rendered in simple lines, but unmistakable with its long, dark hair. "That's Mr. Keanu coming to see your art again." "We'll see," Zoe said gently. Though she'd invited him, she wasn't sure if he would attend. His presence would inevitably draw attention away from the art itself, something she suspected he was conscious of. After getting Lily settled with a babysitter, Zoe arrived at the gallery early, wanting a private moment with her work before the public viewing. The owner greeted her with the respect now routinely accorded to her, no longer the desperate single mother, but an artist whose work commanded both critical acclaim and impressive prices. "We've already had calls from collectors," the owner informed her, "and the Times critic is expected tonight." Zoe nodded, still not entirely comfortable with this aspect of her new reality. The validation was gratifying, but at times she missed the pure, private communion with her art when creating had been about survival rather than exhibition. As the evening began and guests arrived, Zoe found herself surrounded by the art world elite, many of whom now greeted her as a peer rather than a curiosity. She'd learned to navigate these waters over the past months, to speak about her work with confidence, to accept compliments without deflection, but a part of her still felt like an imposter, waiting to be discovered. It was during a conversation with a museum curator that she felt a shift in the room's energy. Without turning, she knew he had arrived. Excusing herself, she made her way through the crowd to where Keanu stood, examining her newest cityscape with genuine interest. "You came," she said simply. He turned, that same warm smile lighting his features. "I wouldn't have missed it. Your evolution as an artist has been remarkable to witness." "Evolution made possible by you," she acknowledged. "Made possible by your talent and perseverance," he corrected. "I just removed some obstacles." They walked through the exhibition together, his presence drawing looks, but also creating a small bubble of privacy as people respectfully kept their distance. "I've been meaning to tell you," Zoe said as they paused before a triptych of urban scenes. "I received an offer to teach a community art class for single parents, with childcare provided during the sessions. That sounds perfect for you." "It was my idea," she admitted. "After the scholarship came through, I approached the institute about creating the program. They agreed to fund it." She looked at him directly. "I wanted to pass it on, the chance that was given to me." The pride in his eyes was worth more than all the sold stickers on her work. "That's how change happens," he said softly. "Not through grand gestures, but through people who've been lifted up reaching back to lift others." As the evening progressed, Zoe was called away for interviews and conversations with potential buyers. Each time she glanced across the room, Keanu was engaged in earnest discussion about her work, never drawing attention to himself but quietly directing interest toward the art. By the end of the night, every piece had sold, and tentative plans were being discussed for exhibitions in New York and London. When most guests had departed, Zoe found Keanu in a quiet corner, studying a small sketch that had been included as part of the exhibition's documentation, her original napkin drawing from the bookstore, now carefully preserved and framed. "I've been meaning to ask," she said. "Why did you keep it, that first drawing?" "Because it reminded me of something important." He turned to face her. "That art isn't about galleries or critics or price tags. It's about seeing the world with open eyes and an open heart, even when, especially when, life makes that difficult." He gestured around them. "All of this is wonderful, But what moved me that night in the bookstore was watching someone create beauty simply because they had to, because it was how they survived. After the exhibition, they shared a quiet dinner at a small restaurant where the staff respectfully maintained their privacy. They spoke not as benefactor and beneficiary, but as two artists, one established, one emerging, sharing experiences of the creative life. As the evening drew to a close, Keanu asked about her plans for the future. "I'm taking Lily to the coast next month," Zoe said. "A working vacation. I want to paint the ocean, and she's never seen it." "The best gift we can give children is to show them possibility," he said, his expression softening. "Your daughter is watching you transform your life through courage and talent. That's a lesson more valuable than any painting." Outside the restaurant, as they prepared to go their separate ways, Zoe finally asked the question that had lingered for months. "Why me? Out of all the struggling artists in the world, why did you choose to help me?" Keanu was quiet for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "Because kindness shouldn't be transactional. You gave me those books without expecting anything in return, simply out of genuine appreciation. In a world where most interactions are calculated, that kind of authentic generosity is rare." He smiled. "And because your art speaks with a voice that deserves to be heard." As Zoe watched him walk away, she understood that the true transformation in her life wasn't the financial security or professional recognition. It was the realization that one moment of human connection could ripple outward, changing not just her own fate, but the fates of others through her teaching, her mentorship, her example. The next morning, as she helped Lily get ready for school, a private arts-focused program that would have been unimaginable months before, her daughter asked, "Are we rich now, Mommy?" Zoe considered the question carefully. "We have enough," she said finally. "And more importantly, we have purpose. And that's a different kind of wealth." Later, in her sun-filled studio, she began sketching a new series, scenes of ordinary people engaged in small acts of generosity, each canvas illuminating how a single moment of kindness could change the trajectory of a life. She titled the series Recognition, in honor of the man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had recognized not just her talent, but her humanity, and who had shown her that true artistry lies not just in what we create, but in how we help others discover what they might become.